This is okay. Everyone is in the lobby, is in the meeting. Duc, do you start?
Okay.
Yeah.
Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending on where you are joining us from. I can tell you that I'm very pleased to welcome you to the third PHARMECO webinar, Step Towards Sustainability Assessment and Regulatory Preparedness. My name is Duke, I'm from Sanofi, and I will be your moderator for today's session. So please feel free to post your questions at any time in the chat. We will have a dedicated Q&A session at the end of this presentation. Next slide, please. On today's agenda, I will begin with a brief introduction to provide you some high-level context. Then our first speaker will be Liselott Boon from Ghent University in Belgium, who will talk about sustainability assessment and steering. Next, we will hear from Hannah Welsch of TU Berlin, who will present on the standardization and harmonization of the sustainability assessment systems. And finally, we will have Teresa Leonardo Alves from the National Institute for Public Health and the Environment in the Netherlands, who will share insights on harnessing regulatory preparedness. And after the presentation, we'll open the floor to questions. So again, feel free to use the chat to share any question. And finally, to close, I will provide some short wrap-up of today. So today, next slide, our story today begins with the drug development process. So many of you, I'm pretty sure, are already familiar with this, and even some of you are even more experts than I am. So to keep it simple, drug development is a quite long, complex journey. Each step is carefully designed to ensure patient safety and drug efficacy. Today, we face the challenge to embed sustainability into this process. So we can design safe and sustainable products from the very beginning. As an industry, we need to understand the full environmental and social impact of our solutions. And to make it meaningful comparisons, we need to speak the same language. That's why standardized and transparent sustainability assessments are essential. And because development takes time, we also need to anticipate future regulations that could affect our products. Next slide. So these challenges are exactly what we are working on with this PHARMECO consortium. To make it short, PHARMECO is a public-private partnership that brings together both innovators like academics, institutions, and public health bodies. But not only, we have also implementers from the private sector, like Sanofi or other, as you can see here on the screen. Next slide. Our main key objectives are summarized here. First, we want to establish standardized sustainability assessments so we can all speak the same language. Secondly, we aim to develop tools that will help steer sustainability throughout the development process. We aim also to identify and implement sustainable manufacturing solutions. And finally, we want to promote the integration of safe and sustainability design principle integration. Next slide. To achieve these goals, PHARMECO is organized into several work packages, as you can see in the screen. The first one focuses on coordination and management of the overall consortium. The work package 2 is dedicated to route design, while the number 6 handles pilot manufacturing and upscaling. On the right of the screen, you can see that we also have 3 different work packages who focuses on sustainable technology platforms. So work package 3 for chemical synthesis, number 4 for biomanufacturing, and number 5 for decontamination. At almost of the center of the slide, you can see that we have the work package 7, which provides sustainability assessment and steering across the project. And finally, we also have 8 and 9, number 8, to build on this by working on the standardization and harmonization of sustainability assessment systems, and the 9, who focuses on dissemination, exploitation, communication, and networking activities. Next slide. Each work package is co-led by public and private organizations with many contributors involved, as you can see here. Today's presentation will focus on work package 7, 8, and 9. Liselott will begin with work package 7, covering topics such as the environmental systemicity assessment for design, evaluation of innovative technologies, integrated systemicity evaluation, and also digital decision support. Then we will have Hannah, who will guide us through the harmonization process for the lifecycle assessment. And finally, Teresa will discuss how we can harness regulatory preparedness. So, without further ado, I will hand over the floor to Liselott, and remember, we have this chat open for your questions.
Thank you, Duc, for this introduction. And good afternoon, everyone. As mentioned, I will give you an impression of the work we are doing within our work package called Sustainability Assessment and Steering. So I'm Liselott. I'm working as a postdoctoral researcher at Ghent University, and I'm co-leading this work package together with colleagues from G&G and Sanofi, so I will be speaking also on their behalf. Next slide, please. So within PHARMECO, we aim to move towards more sustainable manufacturing in pharma, but this implies immediately also the need for quantitative assessment methods to prove and to verify if the efforts we are making are also more sustainable in reality. And this brings us to actually 3 key objectives. First one is on steering sustainability by design. Here we focus on tailoring the SSBD framework to pharma, but I will not go into detail in that one today, as this will be brought up in one of a following webinar in the coming months. Second objective is on sustainability assessment of technologies, and the last one on prospective assessment of pharmaceutical production. Next one, please. So first of all, I will go into the second objective. This entails actually 2 tasks. One is on the environmental sustainability of the innovations which are developed within these work packages 3, 4, and 5, as explained by Duc. And a second aspect is on the integrated sustainability. So next one, please. So for the assessment, we rely on a life cycle thinking approach. And for the environmental sustainability assessment, it means we can rely on life cycle assessment. Well, we still have some methodological work to move towards an end-to-end integrated evaluation. What does this mean? I will explain this in the following slides. So first of all, this life cycle thinking approach actually entails a whole toolbox of assessment methods. And in this one, life cycle assessment is the most advanced one. We also have several tools, standards, handbooks available, but more about this harmonization and standardization in the second part of this webinar. Next one. What is then life cycle assessment? So just in a nutshell, if you have a look at the left, you can see a figure explaining or showing typical life cycles. So starting with raw material extraction, manufacturing, distribution, use, and end of life. And then for each of these stages, we actually compile all input and output flows. So what kind of resources are used? What are the emissions that are occurring? And then we translate this into potential environmental impact of this product system. For this environmental impact, we consider, next to climate change being the most reported one, actually a list of about 16 impact categories. Think about resource use, acidification, toxicity, land use, etc. Next one, please. So if we now translate this to the pharma sector or to the pharma context, of course, we have raw material extraction resulting in inputs for each of the stages, but then we come to the drug substance production, drug product production, packaging, distribution, use, and then after use, we also have part of it metabolized and some residues ending up in the wastewater. On the one hand, we can focus on what is happening within the pharmaceutical factory. Then we can call it a cradle-to-gate analysis. On the other hand, we can move beyond that one, also focusing on what is happening after use, the excretion, but then we also still have some challenges within LCA to clearly account for the effect of, for instance, API ending up in the environment. So also there, we would like to have a look at it. So on the one hand, we will, for the environmental perspective, go to cradle to gate and eventually an end-to-end analysis. And for what are we going to do that? So on the next slide, We are going to evaluate this for the different innovations that are created or developed within the chemical synthesis, biomanufacturing, and decontamination. So these innovations, we will evaluate them by LCA, which will give us the potential to identify hotspots and give them some recommendations to optimize these innovations. On the other hand, to evaluate them, we'd also like to compare them with benchmarks, so the typical technologies that are used today. So for that, we rely on showcases that will be provided by industry partners. And in this way, of course, the innovations should be upscaled so that we can compare the innovations at the same level, technology readiness level, as the showcases of industry. And in this way, we can really compare and get an idea of the environmental sustainability of the innovations. Next one, please. So, but for now, we were focusing on the typical environmental aspects. But on the other hand, you can see it after use, we also have actually a health effect. We are taking this medication, and we might, we hopefully have some positive health effects. So in this way, actually, the typical environmental assessment does not cover all effects or all aspects. And that's why we propose to go to an integrated assessment, and not only including environmental aspects, but also social, economic, circularity, and criticality. So next one, please. What does this mean? So on the one hand, in the middle, you see, again, the life cycle presented. And then normally we are always focusing on the footprint and the burdens at the bottom. So we will, first of all, define the footprint, not only in terms of environmental aspects, but also for the other pillars. But on the other hand, when using the medication, in this way, we might avoid, for instance, extra complications, extra need of treatment or hospitalization. So we have some benefits as well in terms of environment, also social, think about the human well-being, economic, circularity, and criticality. And these benefits, we call them the handprints. So what we want to do is to come to an integrated assessment covering 5 pillars, including both the benefits and the burdens. So if you go to the next one then, yeah, we are not starting from scratch. So first of all, if we rely on work that has been done within, for instance, the European project Transfarm, we can rely on a holistic framework that was developed to evaluate the sustainability of pharmaceutical products. And in this way, in Van Wilder et al., a list of impact categories for the environmental, social, and economic pillar were identified. In this way, we have typical impact categories on land use, water use, climate change, but also more or less typical, I would say, for instance, for social, the patients and societal health and well-being, for instance, or access to healthcare. On the other hand, at the right side, you see a presentation of work that has been done within the Horizon 2020 project orienting. So this resulted in a paper of Hackenhaar in which LCSA was complemented with criticality and circularity. A list of indicators and potential methods were provided. And also here we can get a first basis, I would say, to come to our integrated approach. Next one. Then I was also talking about this handprint footprint analysis. So for that, we can rely on previous work by De Baveye, who made a first trial, I would say, a first example on a worm infection treatment in Vietnam. And this treatment consisted of taking a tablet by children between 5 to 14 years old 2 times a year. This resulted in a need of more than 60 million tablets. And first of all, the environmental footprint was calculated and expressed in DALYs, so disability adjusted life years, created by the environmental impact of the treatment using the recipe methodology. And then you can see the results presented at the bottom. You see that considering the different stages in the life cycle, that mainly the API or the drug substance synthesis is predominant in terms of environmental impact. mainly due to chemicals and energy. So in total, we have about a bit more than 6 dalits per functional unit in terms of environmental footprint. On the other hand, next one, we can also have a look at the handprints. So what are the amount of dalits we can avoid thanks to the treatment of the children? And then we come to a 68% reduction in the amount of dalits. So bringing them together, on the next slides, we have footprint and handprint together results in 18,000 times more dalits that were avoided than created. So this gives us a first impression of accounting for the handprint as well next to the footprint. So this will form the basis for our second objective. And then I can move to the last objective of our work package on prospective assessment of pharmaceutical production. Here we have 2 different tasks. The first one is on the environmental sustainability for route design, which is linked to work package 2, which was also explained, I think, in the first webinar of this series of webinar. And a second one is the creation of a digital decision support for sustainable pharmaceutical production, for which a library of models, AI-driven production models, will be developed. So first of all, going to this route design methodology. So this is linked to the second work package in which they aim to develop methodologies for designing optimal routes for synthesizing APIs during early phase. They are going to have a look and evaluate different route alternatives using SELECT criteria. So SELECT stands for, amongst others, safety, economics, but legal compliance, but also first E refers to the environmental aspect. And that's what is taken up here in this task. So what we will do is evaluate the environmental impact of these different routes that are proposed by work package 2. And for this, we will make a screening of tools available that can be used and tailor them to pharma and then apply it. And then secondly, on prospective assessment, we have also the creation of a digital decision support. And here, this prospective accounts for 2 aspects, the technological effect and the time effects. So on the one hand, we would like to go from information on lab scale to a high TRL level. On the other hand, we would also like to account for the time effect because, as mentioned by Duc, before medication is up to the market, it might take a while. So in this sense, energy mix, for instance, might have been changed. Different waste treatments can be existing. So in this way, it's important to also account for these changes in time. So how will this digital decision support look like? It's on the next slide. There we will start actually from information at lab and pilot scale. User might also make some technical choices. What kind of technological platforms will be used, and also select some future scenarios on energy mix, waste treatment, which region, etc. Then they can select or make use of different modules. So each module will provide actually a model or different models behind it that will result in mass and energy balances. And each module will focus on something else, for instance, on drug substance, biologics, drug product manufacturing, or background system. So at the end, you might end up with a mass and energy balance, and this is, of course, the basis to perform the impact assessment. So this can be implemented in the typical lifecycle impact assessment software. And at the end, the impact result might help you to guide you for support for processes or products in terms of environmental sustainability. So to conclude, the last slide, please. Yeah, then in this work package, we aim to move towards more sustainable pharma and to support this by calculations based on the one hand, life cycle assessment, which is key as this life cycle thinking approach implies or ensures that we avoid burden shifting between life cycle stages or between impact categories, but that it's also needed to further work on that because a lot of data is needed, which is not always easy to collect. So this emphasized the importance of modeling approaches, the importance for further elaboration of the models behind LCA on, for instance, end of life, and to go beyond the environmental pillar as well. So it's clear within this work package, we are with many partners, public and private partners. So we will closely work together with them as well, or together, and also with the different work packages, work package 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6 as well. So with these words, I would like to hand over to Hannah, who will continue with the next part of the webinar.
Perfect. Thanks, Lieselot. So along with the sustainability assessment and steering work in PHARMECO, we're also working towards harmonization of LCA methodologies for pharmaceuticals. So as we're at the start of the process, I'm going to present some needs and some challenges to LCA harmonization and also what we aim to tackle within the project. So in order to green the pharma industry, we need to be able to make environmentally driven decisions throughout the pharma value chain. And in order to do this, consistency in our studies and our analysis is key. So we need methods and tools that support environmentally driven product and process improvements so that we can gain insight into the areas which have the highest improvement potential, and also to ensure that these measures avoid burden shifting and that they really lead to real impact reduction. Additionally, these improvements and environmental performance, so for example, of innovations, also need to be communicated to be able to support the evaluation of alternatives, for example, for procurement or for policy making, and also to meet our regulatory and reporting requirements as well. So why life cycle assessment? In the past, there have been various green metrics or green chemistry metrics that have been used. However, there are some limitations to these, especially when we talk about evaluating potential environmental impact. So we have metrics such as the PMI or the E factor, but these are predominantly efficiency-based and process-orientated. So this doesn't provide us much insight into potential impacts in the environment. They also often focus on segments or synthesis steps taking place within a drug substance or drug product life cycle. And then this also then doesn't enable us to observe potential burden shifting. So for example, between environmental impacts or also between life cycle stages when we implement a supposed green measure. So with LCA, we can consider multiple environmental impacts occurring at different stages, so beyond only manufacturing of drug substance or drug products. And then this allows us to avoid burden shifting and also evaluate these trade-offs between the impacts and life cycle stages. LCA would also allow us to consider the function of the studied product. So for instance, these the curative or preventative treatments, and then also enable us to evaluate alternatives based on the fulfillment of these functions, which is not necessarily the case with the previous process-orientated metrics. Additionally, we also have a greater regulatory focus now on pharmaceuticals in the environment. So LCA could also be a tool that is used then to enable some visibility into key hotspots for points of entry of pharmaceuticals into the environment as well. Next slide, please. So although there are already published LCA studies of pharmaceutical products, and there are also initiatives who have published guidelines or draft guidelines either for product carbon footprinting in the pharma sector or for life cycle assessment in the sector, there is still a lack of agreement on a harmonized sectoral methodology. So some key aspects with distinct differences between published guidelines and studies so far already differ essentially from the goal and scope phase, which is fundamental in life cycle assessment. So some aspects that are included here are, for instance, in the goal of the study. So are we aiming to conduct studies that can be used to support this product and process improvement, so from an environmental perspective, or are these studies conducted purely for reporting and communication purposes? Another aspect is the functional unit and how the product function is defined in itself. Also, the system boundaries that are considered. So, are we assessing only the product system up to the factory gate, so the end of the manufacturing phase, or are we also considering the impacts of use and post-use and the end of life waste treatment, etc.? And then, if so, then how do we consider these? Another aspect is how, or if it's important at all, to consider regional differences within our product systems. So there could be potential differences in prescribing practices, for instance, affecting the use phase and then also the end of life stages, and also then in the technologies that are considered, both upstream and downstream. So a question here would be how we would consider these and in our modeling rules, for instance. Another aspect is the products or the objects of study considered. So are we only looking at preventative or curative uses, or are we also looking at diagnostics products? Are care pathways considered? And then with this large variety of products that we have, and also a variety of manufacturing routes and implemented technologies, how can we also establish a guideline which has consistent rules to cover this variety, this large variety? Additionally, we also would be considering impacts evaluated. So this is key in life cycle assessment. So currently there's still a heavy focus on climate change, whereas there is actually now evidence to show that for pharma, perhaps it is also relevant to look at other impacts such as ecotoxicity or water use, among others. So here is an opportunity to define which ones are most relevant for us to use within our sector. And last in this list is how do we come up with a harmonized approach when we're approaching data gaps? So data gaps here could be, for instance, chemical precursors, missing toxicity data, or impact pathways in the environment, among other gaps as well. So essentially, if these aspects, to name but a few, are inconsistent within existing guidelines, we cannot have consistent studies conducted within the sector. And this poses essentially a hurdle for decision making as well as communication. So starting from the very beginning, one of our steps, or one of our very first steps actually, will be to define what the goal is of the studies that our guideline will aim to support or enable. So why is it important to determine the goal of the study? So essentially, the goal definition is key in LCA because it determines other methodological decisions, such as the formulation of the functional unit and the reference flow, the defining of the system boundaries, the selected impact categories, and also the methods, and also data requirements and data quality requirements. So for an example, a study that's focused on product or process improvement might have other, previous slide, please. Thanks. It might have other data requirements than a study that's purely for reporting or communication purposes. So an aspect here could be data granularity, and that these requirements may be different. So if you're looking at process improvements, energy allocated from site level may not be sufficient, whereas this may be sufficient if you are meeting reporting targets, for instance. So in many guidelines for the sector so far, we do see a tendency to focus on studies for reporting and communication. However, to really green the industry, we do need innovations and improvements on products and processes. So it's important for us to consider whether we also explore the potential for this guideline to support the assessment of improvements as well. Next slide, please. So another key difference that has made studies and guidelines inconsistent so far is in the definition of the functional unit of the pharmaceutical product. So this is, again, key to define because the system that we're describing is explained relative to this functional unit. So some examples that we've pulled out of existing guidelines can be seen in the green boxes here. So the first one is the treatment of one adult or one patient with a disease or indication for a period of application. Another one is the treatment of an adult with a disease or indication in a specified geographic location for a period of application. So here the concept of geographic region is introduced. And in the third one, we have the purchase and ingestion of a specific dosage form with a specific amount of API or drug substance in a very specific location in a defined geographic region. So as you can see among these three, there are already differences which could affect the way the modeling is carried out, the system boundaries are defined. And then when you look at the last one, it's a mass-based unit. So it's the production of X kilograms of drug substance or drug product. So again, since the impacts of the system is analyzed relative to this functional unit, it's important to achieve a degree of consistency in how we explain these to make studies comparable and also to evaluate alternatives. So the functional unit also, it defines essentially the amount of product that we're considering and also defines the boundaries, whether the end of life and use phase are included, and then also how geographic location is considered might reflect then how, for instance, different prescribing practices or production data is used and modeled as well. Next slide, please. So another inconsistency among studies is what system boundaries are considered and which processes then in turn are also considered within these system boundaries. So this is also very much related to the goal of the study and the functional unit. However, to date, there has been a degree of some room for interpretation. And then here, the system boundaries that are drawn essentially determine where we can obtain insight into environmental impacts. The definition of the system boundaries and therefore also the definition of what our core system is then also affects our rules for the use of primary and secondary data, for instance, as well as the rules for modeling processes and pathways, and also for those which are potentially out of the company's control. So for example, the gate to grave stage for manufacturers, so use phase, end of life, waste treatment, etc. So therefore, it's important for us to define consistent guidelines on how we draw our system boundaries and what to include and what to exclude. So this could help us to generate a set of more consistent studies and also a more consistent set of conclusions or messaging that could be drawn and help us in terms of visibility into trade-offs, burden shifting between processes and life cycle stages, and then also evaluate these between studies. Next slide, please. So the selection of the impacts, the LCIA methods and the impact categories are also largely driven by the goal and the product which is under study. So here we need to explore, so in the project, we need to explore which potential impacts should be used to base decisions on in the pharmaceutical industry. And then also which impacts should be communicated or are rather important for reporting, and then also which impacts are potentially more relevant than for product and process improvements, because these may be different as well. Additionally, with growing attention to impacts such as antimicrobial resistance and nanotoxicity, we should also explore if, how, or whether to consider potential impacts that are not yet currently covered by existing LCIA methods and come up with a consistent way to approach this issue. Next slide, please. Again, as mentioned, we're in a sector with a great variety of products and processes. So another challenge posed by this variety of products and also their functions is how to approach the structure of our rules themselves, because we're dealing with a methodology that's very function focused as well. We need a consistent set of rules that enables some degree of comparability so that we can compare studies, compare products. However, different types of products may also have different modeling requirements. So the question here that we need to navigate is how do we manage this potential trade-off between comparability but also specificity? So an example shown here is extracted from a paper in 2019 from Ziegert et al. And they propose a structure for a horizontal set of guidelines, horizontal rules for the sector. And these are then narrowed down into a set of vertical rules, and they propose these ATC specified product classifications. So this is also something that we could potentially consider the structure of a horizontal guide and vertical rules if it is also useful for our use cases. Next slide, please. So all in all of these challenges and many questions have culminated into this work package 8 in PHARMECO. And here our objectives are to harmonize the efforts and methodologies for LCA of pharmaceuticals, to provide a methodological basis that facilitates data provision and exchange along the supply chain, and also to ensure knowledge transfer so that the harmonized approach to the methodology gets implemented and encourage uptake. So we'll be working together with our private and public partners, with our implementers and innovators in our work package, and then later on in the process also have stakeholder consultations. And our efforts will result ultimately in our main outcome, which is a stakeholder accepted life cycle assessment guideline for pharmaceuticals. So a great advantage of embedding this consensus-based LCA harmonization work in PHARMECO is actually that we have both the practical innovative work, as you can see on the right-hand side, and this is then connected by Lisa Lott's work package 7, which is focused on the sustainability steering work and the life cycle assessment and other assessments, which provides then sort of feedback, ongoing work in parallel that enables us to also road test our methodological aspects for the life cycle assessment guideline. So we can essentially evaluate them and reflect as we construct them with the ongoing work in the technical work packages as well. So it's essentially this practice and theory and experience all going hand in hand during a multi-stakeholder process. And keen to see what happens as we go along. So I'm going to hand over now to Teresa.
Thank you. Well, good afternoon, everybody. I'm really delighted to join this webinar today and to introduce the topic of regulatory preparedness in line with the plans that are set ahead for the PHARMECO project. So my name is Teresa Leonardo Alves. I am a senior researcher based at the National Institute for Public Health and the Environment in the Netherlands, which is also known as RIVM. Next slide, please. In case you are wondering what is the RIVM, so we are the Dutch Institute for Public Health and the Environment. We act as a trusted advisor and operate as an independent knowledge institute for the Dutch Ministry of Health, Welfare and Sport. Our key competences include research and implementing policy independently while working for the public interests. The colleagues involved in PHARMECO make up a multidisciplinary team, and they have various backgrounds and expertises. So we have colleagues coming from the Center for Health Protection, where I'm based. So we bring along expertise on pharmaceutical policy, but we also have colleagues that bring along expertise on environmental risk assessment, and they're based at the Center for Safety of Substances and Products, and other colleagues that bring along expertise on life cycle analysis, and they're based at the Center for Sustainability, Environment and Health. The RIVM is also actively engaged in other international projects such as Premier and Transfarm, which also focus on aspects that are related to sustainability. Next slide, please. Picking up on some of the life cycle images and schemes that have been already presented during this webinar, if we look closely at the activities along the pharmaceutical life cycle, we can identify several steps that go from discovery to development, to production, to distribution, to prescription and sales, to patient drug administration, to collection and sorting, treatment of waste, including waste with pharmaceutical residues, and also the fate of medicines residues. Along all these steps, we can identify specific stakeholders that are involved in these different activities. And this is very important to bear in mind as we dwell into the goals of Track 9.4. Next slide, please. So Track 9.4 within PHARMECO focuses on harnessing regulatory preparedness. Our aim is to improve regulatory preparedness so that more environmentally sustainable products are adopted. How do we plan to do that? Well, this involves supporting plans to strengthen necessary capacities to help to reduce or eliminate hindrances along the whole life cycle, considering what is needed in terms of regulatory testing. So identifying challenges in regulatory frameworks that may hamper the uptake of PHARMECO results. We will be doing this while taking stock on lessons learned from other projects, as I mentioned, for instance, Transfarm. We also aim to share and build knowledge between the consortium partners and regulatory experts so that we will be able to inform forthcoming guidance and policy. And this is particularly relevant at the moment because we are currently in the context of a review of the pharmaceutical legislative framework at European level. So one of the questions now is, how do we go from these goals into plans? And that's what I'm going to show in the next slide, please. So our approach is to follow the project implementation and along its steps to canvass input from the consortium members to identify regulatory priorities. So likewise, we plan to also ask for feedback from the Scientific Advisory Board. So we plan to run workshops with consortia partners, regulators, both national and European level, and experts from public institutions on selected issues which are considered a priority. Within those workshops, we'll engage in discussions about barriers and incentives, and the information that is shared and the results thereof will be collated to prepare policy briefings and summaries to the public, so that we can disseminate, on one hand, the knowledge that we have gained, but also inform future guidance and policy, also beyond the end of the PHARMECO project. Next slide, please. While we are still at the initial stage, here are some of the priorities that have been identified so far. On one hand, the need for efficient regulatory filing, including at post-approval level when changes are needed to the master file, the need for incentives to promote sustainability and circular economy within policy and regulation, and also the tension between sometimes regulatory roles and requirements and new legislative provisions. For instance, when there are requirements for pharmaceutical products that uphold a certain level and standards, and then, for instance, when there is an environmental legislation that curtails the use of certain type of products. When somebody mentions regulatory hurdles, our consortium partners mostly consider that, well, it is a complex and cumbersome process full of red tape with a lot of specificities and requirements. The group also has foreseen some barriers and identified those. Often there is a variation in the requirements across different jurisdictions, which can become a real challenge for pharmaceutical companies who invest in sustainability at global level. There are also questions about how can we meet the requirements for standards and benchmarking while we are also adapting or creating a new production process. And another question that is also posed is, drug development takes several years. What happens when policy and regulation change in between? How does that reflect into our new products? It was also mentioned that the approval of new technology can also become a barrier when there is a lack of knowledge about that specific new technology or process at regulatory level and side. How can that be addressed? So far, most of the barriers that have been identified have been attributed to the production stage, so most notably concerning those new processes or new technologies. Next slide, please. Which plans do we foresee within our specific working plan? Well, as to proposed timelines, we'll be holding a consortium-wide workshop later this year, where at which we will confirm the two overarching priorities to be addressed by our track. Then the year thereafter, in 2026, we will hold two tailored workshops, one per priority, to explore the identified priority and the problems to be addressed. And here we expect to have as participants, both consortium members, but also regulatory experts, as mentioned. Then the year after, in 2027, we will write up the information shared in those workshops and produce a policy briefing as well as summary for the general public. And then the year thereafter, in 2028, we will be holding another two workshops, but this time also per priority, focus on solutions. Again, the year thereafter, we follow the same procedure in the sense that we also aim to publish another policy briefing and a public summary. And then finally, in 2030, we will aim to hold a final workshop to share and discuss the results of our work. Next slide, please. So in summary, what I would like to focus, and these are my take-home messages to you, this topic of regulatory preparedness activities are of relevance for the whole PHARMECO project, so not just for a particular work package. It's ongoing work, which is expected to be carried out throughout the whole project's implementation. And having said that, the input that is shared within the consortium is key. So the best way to have your voice heard is to participate. If you are not a consortium partner, but are interested in being kept up to date on this topic, please, and our planned activities, do let us know. And I would like to thank you for your attention, and I'll now hand over the floor to the facilitator of this session, Duc Nam Lu.
Thank you, Teresa. I can see we have in fact several questions, at least two different because two of them are quite related. So I will start. Are you planning to develop an additional standard or road design principles? And we have additional comments regarding that. It's referring to what's happening with the past 2019. The initiative was together for sustainability in the INOMS standard and so on. So I guess we have two questions within this one. I will hand over first to Hannah, maybe to address the question regarding the standard.
Yep, thank you for the question. That's a good one. So in our harmonization process, it is also very important to consider the existing guidelines and standards that have been released or are in the process of being released. Partly also we have some project partners involved with both the PAS and also in the Pharma LCA consortium and have had experience in these methodological discussions already. So I think our aim is also not to start from scratch, but also to see this as a great opportunity to put together a set of guidelines that can also kind of harness key aspects, be aligned with our requirements so far as well, but then also take this opportunity to implement a set of guidelines that could also be road tested. And we see also in the past and also in the Pharma LCA or the PEG consortium guideline, this focus on communication and reporting. So perhaps it's also key to explore a potential set of guidelines that could do this, but then also be sort of focused on innovation and a set of rules that could be used for evaluating improvements inside and be used as a tool in-house, so to say, as well as a reporting tool. So we will be considering these definitely, yes.
Thank you, Anna, for your answer. Liselott, would you like to comment regarding the other part of the question and with the fact that the ACS community is also working on the road design principles since many years, I would say?
Yes, for sure. Also here, I think first of all, we are lucky to have many partners in our consortium. So also some of them are really linked to that. And also here, we would not like to redo work. That's totally not the goal. So what we aim for is really working together. And at this moment, we're making the connections. Of course, we start first of all, what is publicly available. And we see where we can add some additional aspects, can add some improvements. But for sure, we start from what is there, and it's really important work that has been done so far, and it's nice that we can start from that point. So that's for sure true. We will not. We will for sure make the link and keep connection ongoing.
Thank you, Liselott. Keep your mic on because you have another question. What do you see as the biggest challenge for the evaluation of the innovation and its implementation in the pharmaceutical industry?
Yeah, good question. And I think within LCA, often the main challenge is the data collection, and also here this might be key. You must see that a long list of innovations are foreseen within the different work packages. And some of them are at very early stage, while others are already a little bit on a higher TRL level or are a bit more developed already. And this might be easier in this sense to give us already some data as a basic point. So how we are tackling at this moment is, first of all, really together with the partners, so from the different work packages, we are defining what are the different innovations that might be evaluated first. And we're lucky to have a 6-year project, so we have time to spread them over the time and to see, okay, for which innovations do we have already some information available, and we can start with those while the others have still time to evolve it. But even then, of course, there is a challenge that not all data might be easy to collect. So it might be also based on experience within the company. We will work together with them also for scaling up, but also there we can rely on modeling, engineering principles, etc. So I think that's the main challenge and how we see to tackle it.
Thank you, Liselott. Last question for Teresa. Which legislative or regulatory initiatives are the most critical to address in the PHARMECO project based on priorities, regulatory hurdles and barriers from your point of view?
Well, I would say this is a very pertinent question that we also need to discuss within the consortium. In my view, and I see it a bit differently, I think the legislative and regulatory initiatives that are out there set a certain context, but it's up to the consortium also to identify which ones are the priorities of the regulatory hurdles and barriers that need to be addressed. So we will go, we'll follow that process in the mapping of the priorities of the consortium, and then we will, should I say, we will, by pinpointing those, we will mirror those into what is happening in terms of legislative or regulatory initiatives. This is a moment in time where there's several legislative initiatives that have an impact on the sector. I mentioned the pharmaceutical review, but at the moment there are also very extensive discussions on the European Union's revised urban wastewater treatment directive, which also has implications for polluters, and pharmaceutical companies have been identified therein as one of the key polluters, who will also bear the financial burden for advanced wastewater treatment. So, for instance, that is definitely a current hot topic at the moment that might also affect the discussions within the consortium. But I would tend to say this is a road we need to travel when we get there. So at this point in time, I cannot say this or that because it's not up to me to make that decision. But it's also to the consortium as a collective to identify those priorities and to reflect on those. I would say that from a researcher point of view, one of the big issues that we faced, and also in light with what has been previously mentioned by the previous speakers, is measuring is half of the way of knowing. So we are always limited by the amount of data we have. If we don't have data, we do not know. If we do not know, we cannot decide. So I could say that from a regulatory perspective, one of the big limitations we have is also the knowledge about a potential toxicological impact of a given pharmaceutical product, which we have for the products that have been more recently adopted, but yet the whole arsenal of therapeutic choices that we have very often include medicines that have been in the market for longer and for which we do not have data available. So I think that there's a domain of having access to relevant data that is needed to make certain choices from a regulatory point of view, then bringing along within the regulatory process what are then the barriers and the potential incentives that we can identify, and then discussing it also as a consortium together with the regulatory experts, what could be solutions thereof. I hope I've answered the question. I turned it a bit around. I hope that it won't make me unpopular, but it's also why we need to do this as part of the process of the consortium work. Yes.
Quite clear. Thank you, Teresa. Another question, in fact, for Liselott now. The integrated assessment seems really interesting. Why are security and criticality relevant to take up?
Yes. So if we are making changes in the manufacturing, it means we also make changes in the raw material or the feedstock we are using. And in this sense, it might be good to map the potential risks when changing the feedstock and the use of raw materials. So including potential diversified supply chains and what is the effect of it, what about recovery or reuse of solvents, what can it bring, but also supply risks in this way could be relevant to be identified. So in this way, research criticality and circularity might help us to get insights in these aspects. So solvent recycling, for instance, but also the risk of the supply chains. I think that's more or less a short summary of why we have chosen to include those aspects as well.
Thank you, Liselott. And last question. Digital decision support seems valuable for industry, however, very challenging. Can you elaborate a bit more on the challenges?
Seeing the time, I will try to keep it very short. Yeah, for sure, data collection there is key. and we would like to see or to make links between lab scale up to commercial scale. So there, when data, we said to use AI-driven models. When this is not possible, data-driven can be replaced by data-supported. So that's just some data is used, and that we rely on more engineering principles to model the environmental impact and the material needs. So in this way, we can try to avoid some of the challenges and just work in stepwise procedure. First, see if we can rely on all data. If not, we can rely on engineering principles, etc. So this was in a nutshell some of the aspects.
Thank you. For the sake of time, I think I will need to wrap up, but we will try to provide the answer for the last question. So to wrap up, next slide. I will not go through the shopping list of the slide that you will see, but I guess you understand that the main point of PHARMECO Consortium is the partnership. It's to work together to be able to enable the stability for the pharmaceutical industry, and this strong collaboration between industry and public partners is really essential for the success and to be able to again leverage the stability within the pharmaceutical industry. So thank you for the presenters. For your insights. Thank you for your attention, the questions. I think it shows that it's quite interesting topics to discuss. And feel free to stay tuned with our work. PHARMECO, you have the links, the homepage, the LinkedIn, so you can be updated with the different evolution of our works. Thank you all.